Hey, how's it going? So with this vlog, I was going to just focus on doing a switch up on the wall that I use for my movie trailer reaction videos. I normally try to switch out a few comics for each episode. If you've looked through them, you may have noticed some of the comics in the background change, but most of them have stayed up there for a while, and so I'd like to kind of go through and basically take them all down, rearrange them. There are a few that have been up there since the beginning, and I just like to kind of remove them and replace them with other comics that I'd like to put up there. I did actually get a release for both the new Spectre trailer, the James Bond movie that's coming out, but it's coming out in a week, so it's kind of redundant for me to do a reaction video of that one now. And there are plenty of people who have already done them, so just watch them. And the second one that I got a release for was the new Star Wars The Force Awakens trailer. But in the time that I was waiting between when the trailer was released online and when I was given clearance for it, which was really only a couple of days, I noticed that the trailer that was released online had already gotten over 40 million views. And almost as many reaction videos about that trailer, so it seems kind of redundant for me to do a trailer reaction video on either of those at this point. Plus, I'm not really too impressed with either of those trailers, and I don't really want to get into spinning my wheels on them and ending up ruining the movies themselves for me. So I'm just going to focus on waiting for the movies to come out and bite my tongue on what I thought of those two trailers, other than I think they could have been a lot better. And we'll go from there. But in the meantime, I thought I would just do a quick vlog on, well, we'll see how quick it is, on some of the comics that I have on here. I'll get out of the way. I know there's a big light flare in the middle of the screen there, but you can see most of the comics there. Some of them are from the 60s, some of them are from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And you've got the Pogo Possum in the upper left-hand corner. That's from the 50s, a classic Walt Kelly comic. And beside that, to the left, you've got Fantagor, which is a 1970s Last Gasp comic done by Richard Corbin, who was a huge influence on me when I wanted to be a comic book artist years ago. You've got Flash Gordon, and that's Alex Raymond's baby. Flash Gordon was created by him in the 30s to go up against Buck Rogers, that was hugely popular in the Sunday Funnies, and King Syndicate wanted to come up with something that would compete with it, and they handed it off to Alex Raymond, who came up with Flash Gordon. He did Jungle Jim. There were a few other strips that he had done, and Flash Gordon became a huge hit. With that one, I'd like to actually replace it with a number 6 I've got here, which I'll show you in a moment. And going right through, you got the Superman, and then you've got Adventures of Fat Freddy's Cat, if anyone's familiar with underground comics from the 70s and early 80s. That's Gilbert Shelton. The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers is where Fat Freddy's Cat came from. Fat Freddy was one of the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. They were a bunch of potheads. And most of the comics had to do with their misadventures of trying to score pot and evade the police. Next to that, you've got a fairly early version of the Invincible Iron Man. I think that this one was actually a reprint of his origin story. You can see in the cover artwork where they've got the original silver Iron Man, or gray Iron Man, and I think that they actually do go over the story where he stepped on a landmine, and it's a little bit different than the story that we've seen relatively recently in the movies. Beside that is Elf Lord. That was published or created and published here in Ottawa by Aircel. Aircel was a publishing company. It actually began as an insulation company and had nothing at all to do with comic books, but it lost a federal government contract, and instead of the company folding, Barry Blair, who worked for Aircel Insulation at that time, suggested to the bosses and owners of the company to change into a publishing company, and Barry Blair began creating these comic books out of that company. If you're not really familiar with Aircel Publishing, they were actually bought over by Malibu, which ended up being part of Marvel Comics later on. And probably the most recognizable title that Aircel was connected with would have been the first issues of the Men in Black comic book. They published that initially, and then all of the transfer of ownership and that sort of thing, and Marvel ended up owning it, and this was long before the movies came out. Next to that, you've got the #1 Alpha Flight, and I did talk about that comic book in the haul video that I did a while ago, coming out of the Comic-Con here in Ottawa that happened a few months ago. And I picked up a few other comics since then, mostly old ones, but some new ones, and I'd like to kind of keep it to the older ones, just because I'm a huge fan of the older artists and some of the work that they've done. But if you do want to see newer work, I mean, I can show you newer stuff. This was one that I picked up not too long ago. Just kidding. I picked it up not too long ago, but obviously it's harkening back to the older books. Some of the comics that I've been looking at to replace what's up on the wall, and I had actually mentioned, I had to put together a small stack. Richard Corbin, who did Fantagor, is probably more well known for his Den series. That came out in the 80s. Den was one of the stories that was picked up by Heavy Metal for the movie that came out, and he was voiced by John Candy. But this one was it's a gorgeous looking comic, and of course I was very young at the time, so of course there's a lot of nudity in it. It's an underground comic. It's an alternative press comic, and so all of the naked buxom women is what attracted my attention at first, and then I grew to appreciate the artistry of his stuff. So I'm not exactly sure if this is Alex Raymond's work, and here's another issue. This is #6, which I think I'm going to put up instead. It's a nicer cover. It's in better shape. You can see there's Flash Gordon, there's Dale Arden, and then Dr. Zarkov. I guess they're going sturgeon hunting on an alien planet. But again, I'm not exactly sure if these are, they're beautiful illustrations, but they could be Mac Raboy's work. He illustrated Flash Gordon in the 60s when these were published, and so I'm guessing that this is probably his work as opposed to Alex Raymond's work. The next comic that's up there is Superman. Now I've got loads of Superman comics that I could put up to replace it. Here's one. It's Action Comics number 273 of Superman. It's a nice old comic. It's in a little bit rough shape. You can see there's some scuffing on the top there. It's a little bit of chipping, but it's still a nice looking cover, and I may use that one. The overall composition is really nice too on this one, and I love that approved by Comics Code Authority symbol in the corner. It's just too funny. But I've got other Superman comics that I could put up instead. I mean, there's the notorious Doomsday series. There's Doomsday all ready to go on a rampage. The Beginning of the End, Doomsday. That's from '82. And then we've got the head-to-head Doomsday, which we will probably see in the upcoming Superman movie. Spoiler alert. But that's a cool cover. I may put that one up. Probably a lot nicer than this one, which is the aftermath of that face-off, where we have the crowd standing around Superman's grave. So I think I already had a Black Panther comic up there, but as I was going through my collection, I was happy to see that I picked up quite a few of the Black Panther comics. Here's another one. I grabbed this one primarily because it's such a cool cover. It's number 5 of Black Panther, and it's actually a Kirby cover. Jack Kirby is a famous Marvel Comics illustrator, and you can right off the bat see that it's his style. And then, of course, we have the epitome of the kick-ass He-Man in the Marvel Universe in the 70s, which was Luke Cage. And I could go with that one. I think I've had a couple, at least one, maybe a couple of different Luke Cage comics on the wall. But as you know, nobody laughs at Mr. Fish, and it'd be cool to put this one up, probably immediately underneath the Flash Gordon one where they're sturgeon fishing. Omaha, which was a landmark comic book series that just gorgeous artwork inside, interesting story, definitely an adults-only story, just tragic as far as what happened to the creators. One of them was in a car accident after surviving cancer, the other one got cancer and died, and their spouse had to take over. It seemed to be one thing after the other, but the comic itself, I think, still stands the test of time. The next comic that I wanted to show you that I might replace Fat Freddy's cat with is Alan Moore's V for Vendetta. And I was very happy to find this. I didn't think I'd ever see any of these comics. Usually when the films come out, the comics disappear because people grab them up and hide them in their collection forever. This 1988, beautiful artwork. David Lloyd did a beautiful job on this, and so it was really cool to find this comic, and I actually found a couple of them from this series, probably after everyone had already gone through and grabbed all of the Alan Moore stuff from pretty well everything else that he's written that became famous. Along the lines of movies, I could also just go with something like, he is James Bond, he's Scottish, spying to save the UK. And if he saves the planet, well, I guess that's okay. Spying and running and jumping and jumping and shooting and humping. He's James Bond, Scottish, yada da da da. What would be cool is if they actually did a proper adaptation of this story. I mean, anybody who has read the book knows that it was one of Fleming's short stories, and really didn't have much at all to do with what they did with the movie. And anyone who's a big James Bond fan here in Ottawa will definitely know that the story is completely different. Case in point, Bond was driving a Hertz Plymouth sedan along the broad Route 17 from Montreal to Ottawa and trying to remember to keep on the right of the road. The headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are in the Department of Justice alongside Parliament buildings in Ottawa. Like most Canadian public buildings, the Department of Justice is a massive block of grey masonry built to look stodgily important and to withstand long and hard winters. Why can't we have James Bond here in Ottawa? It's in the book from the guy who created James Bond. Where's James Bond in Ottawa? Just saying. So next up we've got Iron Man comic. That's the one where I was talking about it being a bit of an origin story, number 47. And we've got an earlier one is number 44, Iron Man, where he's facing another strange nemesis. Beautiful artwork, just gorgeous. Although that's a very strange pose. Very strange pose for the Iron Man. It kind of looks like he's already been punched in the head or something. But very cool comic. Very cool comic artwork. And I had another one here. Oh, speaking of weird poses, I just had to laugh when I saw this one. It's Spider-Man and Captain America 128, which I believe is from the 80s. Just look at that cheesy cover. Isn't that the cheesiest comic book cover that you've ever seen? I mean, it's a photograph of the two actors dressed up. One is Captain America, the other one is Spider-Man. It's even got the photographer's name here on the side. It's clearly, it's clearly a photograph that they may have done a little bit of retouching on some of it. But then they go in and somebody redrew all of the detail in Spider-Man's costume because it didn't show up properly in the photograph. That's just craptacular is what it is. It's just so funny and cheesy. When I saw this, I absolutely had to have it. From the late 80s, I don't know what they were thinking. From that department, I mean, you could also go with the Spider-Woman comic. I think this was the last issue of this version of Spider-Woman, where, again, they started off with a photograph and then went in and retouched it. They added some weird faces to people. They embellished on the costuming. They embellished on the costuming here. They probably painted in wings here. It's very strange art decision. The other funny thing about it is that I guess this is one of the first cosplayers dressed up as Spider-Woman. Here we are in 1988. But just a cheesy cover. I've no idea what they were thinking. Maybe they only had 5 minutes to come up with a cover idea and just went ahead with that. She's obviously lying on her side. I mean, that's probably how the photograph was taken. It's just so bad. That'll probably end up on the wall because it makes me chuckle every time I see it. And if you look back through the episodes, you'll see there are usually one or two comics where the movies have either been adapted from the comics or the comics have been adapted from the movies. Namely the Star Wars comic that came out in '77, around the same time that the movie came out. Here's another Star Wars comic with the man himself on there. Pretty cool. So this is the adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, one of the issues from that series. And then we've got, this was actually a limited series that was released, I believe, around the time that the movie came out for Return of the Jedi. But yeah, cool stuff. Cool stuff. And then for and then for the die-hard Star Wars fans, of course, no collection would be complete without an Ewoks comic. Oh, there was a comic that I had included at the end of my comic book haul on the last video that I really didn't get a chance to talk about at all, but I included it anyhow. And it's a fairly landmark comic of the Avengers. This one is Avengers 29. And I was very happy to actually find this one at a reasonable cost. It's it was probably at a reasonable cost because it's kind of chewed up. You can see there's lots of folds and chips and nonsense happening on the cover. But if you look closely, you'll also notice this character right here. Well, fans of the Avengers might know that this is Black Widow. And this comic marks the beginning of Black Widow being part of the Avengers. I was very happy to find this comic. It's one of the early incarnations of the Avengers, where you've got Captain America, Goliath, you've got Hawkeye, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch. So this would be, I believe this would be pre-Vision. I don't think Vision actually existed at this point. But yeah, just a beautiful cover. Just a gorgeous cover. Wow. Love these old comics. Just can't get enough of these old comics. So thanks a lot for checking out this video. And hopefully you're still enjoying this ride and all the various things that I come up with. This vlog is primarily just me being able to goof off and talk about different things. Let me know if you like that. Let me know if there's particular things that you would prefer that I focus on with the vlogs. And thank you very much for checking out. Leave your comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And yeah, onwards and upwards. Cheers.